quick one myself. And I was looking at particularly slide 22, where you've had different applications. We did a study down in Wisconsin and set up a data warehouse, which brought up about 7 or 8 different laboratory systems data into a data warehouse. 40% of the data elements were had significant problems with them. Wrong data, incorrect data, other fields, mislabeled. How do you deal with that? And also, there's got to be services related to authoritative sources because each application may be different.
Yeah, I think part of it's going to be through the messaging and standards that we establish. Part of it will be through the security services. We're going to have to establish trust relationships with these applications as well, and trust relationships across the enterprise as well. You're right. There's huge challenges here. I'm kind of, trivializing it a bit, but I think it's solvable. I really do believe that the technology we need, not all the standards, but certainly the technology we need, is available today and commercially available as well. So
I worry less about the technology than I do about the human environments that are creating or not standardizing their data or otherwise problems.
Yeah, no, you're right. And we're looking at ways of, I'll call it normalizing that as well, so making that kind of semantically consistent across the continuum of care.
One back here to start.
In follow-up to your issue, I've worked with clinical health for decades too, and that would be my comment. I know of only 2 texts where they have actually standardized the values. One's for lung time, for cardiovascular, and then there's bone density for osteoporosis. And then the BC registry case that you mentioned is very, very good because they've worked 2-3 decades at trying to get standard clinical response definition. And I think you've got the key question and the starting point of medical definition, which is a complex disease. It doesn't agree between one pathologist and the next pathologist, for instance. And the recording of a cancer definition by 5 surgeons who work together and collaborate, supposed to believe in each other, incredible difference.
Yep.
So I think that's your starting point.
No, we recognize there's a huge challenge there. That other architecture project I referred to, its first phase is targeted at understanding those requirements, understanding the kind of the state of the art and what the gap is in moving that from where it is to where we think it needs to be. And that's what we'll do through further investments, is try and close that gap as much as we can.
The second one is here.
Who would own the data inside of the
Oh, well, that's the third hour of the 2-hour discussion. And I'll just share with you what most people believe. The data is yours. It's about you. The chart is the provider's. And someone has to kind of be the custodian of that chart, or charts, obviously the population. And someone kind of has to be the steward of giving access or granting access to that data across the continuum of care. So there's a lot of issues there. We didn't attempt to solve them. We attempted to identify them and identify the services that we would need to enable not only what we believe might be required today, but what might be required tomorrow.
Well, if we can finish my question, I was thinking more specifically about cases where perhaps the patient objects to the content of the health record or says it is inaccurate, and the care provider says, this is accurate information, I need this to take care of the patient.
Most legislation I've seen gives the patient the right to challenge that and correct it. One of the users of this system, one of the authorized users, can be the patient themselves. So most people believe they should have access to their EHR data.
You mentioned that kind of Health Infoway is all about the infrastructure and not the infrastructure. Where do you see funding being provided for infrastructure in terms of with this, an EHR solution to require the network communication and infrastructure there to be reliable and secure?
So where should funding for the infrastructure, the things that we're not funding, come from? I think there are 3 sources at least: the federal government directly, other organizations like Infoway that may be investing or providing some of those solutions, and then ultimately the provinces and territories. Yeah.
Who will police access to the data? Is it the federal responsibility or the provincial responsibility?
In this country, it's provincial. So they would be accountable to that. So the question was around who would kind of police access to the data.
What are going to be the key fields to identify patients? Maybe social insurance number, maybe a medical
So how do we identify patients? That's what the whole client registry is about. Some of those things you mentioned we can't use legally. So we look at other ways of uniquely identifying a patient, and there are commercial components known as EMPIs, Enterprise Master Patient Indices, that provide the logic to, given certain data elements like name and address and gender and birth date, very often uniquely identify an individual. Obviously, there are times when human intervention is needed, but once they're uniquely identified, our objective is to have a system identifier that is a lifetime and unique identifier literally across the country. That is used just by the system. It would never be exposed to, it wouldn't even make sense to a human being. Well, it doesn't show it here, but the EHRS locator would be using that system identifier to uniquely identify your records throughout the enterprise.
Can any of the jurisdictions certify impact assessment on these projects? If so, how far along are they?
Yeah, every project we invest in is required to do a privacy impact assessment.
How are you doing?
How are we doing? The responsibility of doing those is the provinces, and we don't have anything that's at that point yet, so I don't have anything to report.
Yeah, so far you're seeing projects that will ultimately reside in the data center of a host hospital, or possibly a provincial one like Smart Systems for Health and Building, that sort of thing. Over time, will any of those components of the bus or anything like that have to reside in like a CHI type data center, or is it felt that it would always be, these services would just be a web of things that are hosted by hospitals?
Yeah, so kind of where would these systems live? We're not, the other thing we don't do is we don't operationalize anything. We don't even fund the operations of anything that we deploy. Again, that's a provincial territorial responsibility. I would assert that if you don't see the business case in what we're doing, then don't deploy it. So you should be generating some either healthcare efficiencies or better outcomes or increased patient safety that should then free up some monies in your provincial budget that could then be used to operationalize these. So Infoway does not operationalize these systems. So where the provinces and territories choose to host these, some of them are small enough where they can host it literally in one data center. They may have the shared PACS environment there. They may have the other aspects of the infrastructure and EHR literally in one physical data center. Some of them may band together and share a data center. Something like Ontario may have 3 or 4 or 5 data centers because it's just for scalability and redundancy purposes. So again, we don't care. That basic picture you saw serves a jurisdiction, and for us a jurisdiction is just any geopolitical entity. It could be a metropolitan area, it could be a health region, it could be a province, a territory, or it could be a group of provinces or territories.
Is anybody working towards a world standard for electronic health records?
Yeah, the question is around, is anyone working on some world standards? There are a lot of initiatives. In fact, one of the guys on the team is down in D.C. literally Tuesday through Thursday of this week. There are some ISO standards. There are other initiatives like in other countries, like in the UK and Australia. There are actually some open source initiatives that we discovered a few months ago out of the US that we're going to take a peek into as well. So yeah, there are a lot of kind of standards initiatives as well as solution initiatives going on throughout the world. Some people think we are further ahead than some other countries as well.
Do you see any new processes for defining access? Current data custodians will govern access. Having been involved with EMR projects, I know there's a whole lot involved with defining who gets access to new pieces of information. So interested in your comments on within EHR place, how that process would unfold.
So I think the basic question is around new processes for data access, is that right? I think it's inevitable. We're seeing it today. So for example, in some of the drug solutions we looked at, there's the ability to mask certain data. So let's say the drug is related to HIV, and drugs that might have a social stigma, a particular patient may want to mask that. And in this particular solution, the doctor would see that something is masked and would ask for consent, explicit consent from the patient right during the encounter to get access to that masked data. Again, it's really all about providing the best quality care, because that new drug could interact with the drug that's been masked, and how would the doctor know that? So yeah, there will be new kind of policies and procedures and processes as well that will be required, given the fact that we're kind of IT enabling the healthcare system.
Dennis, thank you very much. Very, very enjoyable presentation, and we chose the right person to come.
Thank you for having me.
One final comment. Probably, I'm not sure how many people know about this, but Shirley Fenton is the person that actually organizes these, and I think through the years, I think this year was better than she did last year, and we're hoping that next year will even be better. But meanwhile, congratulate you on the choices.